Hi there, AP Euro students, and welcome to today's lecture, which is going to cover our final three themes of the course, which is number 6, economic and commercial developments, number 7, national and European identity, and number 8, technological and scientific innovation. Your objective for today's lecture, which will draw upon various topics, is to explain the causes of increased economic activity in Europe during the Middle Ages and to define medieval European identity. So let's explore our first theme, which is economic and commercial developments. And of course, we're still talking about the context of the Middle Ages. It wasn't until the High Middle Ages that we really start to see an economic recovery in Europe and the return of real civilization. In the High Middle Ages, there was increased urbanization and declining manorialism. But remember, the decline of manorialism is very gradual. That takes many, many centuries until we get to the modern era. So after the Viking raids declined in about the 10th century, this allowed for the growth of cities and towns, which would also allow for increased economic activity. In these towns, we start to see increased population, which means there's an increase in the demand for jobs and education. And also around this time, we saw some notable agricultural innovations. Some peasants even began to gain financial freedom with certain agricultural advances so that they could leave serfdom and become free farmers with no landlord, and they could even move to some of the cities. With all of this comes increased economic activity. Specifically, we see this in the growth of trade and banking across Europe. This also allowed for some social mobility within the towns, especially among the merchant class. People might be able to gain more wealth and therefore more social status in towns and urban areas. Also, this new technology led to increased agricultural output. So there's more agricultural goods that are being circulated in the economy. Some peasants are even able to farm enough maybe to create a surplus to sell their goods. Money also starts to replace the barter system, so we start to see more cash-based transactions as opposed to barter, which is trading stuff for stuff. And also, different areas of Europe began to specialize in trade goods. For example, the Netherlands began to specialize in cloth manufacturing. England began to specialize in wool manufacturing. France specialized in wine and cheese and some other luxury goods. There was also trade across the Mediterranean, especially those luxury goods that would come in from the Middle East and the Far East, and Mediterranean trade was largely dominated by the Italian city-states, specifically Venice and Genoa. In this environment, we also see some of the first European banks emerge. Remember, banking was sometimes controlled by Jewish families because Christians were forbidden from the practice of usury. But by the time we get to the later Middle Ages, we will start to see some Christian-controlled banks emerge. We also see various insurance companies start to emerge specifically to support merchants and their commerce. All of this supports the rise of the merchant class. So merchants are starting to develop considerable power in urban areas and trading cities, and this is probably most obvious in Italy. And finally, we start to see the development of guilds in the High Middle Ages. A guild is sort of an interesting organization that is fairly unique to the Middle Ages and early modern era. It is essentially an organization that groups people together in the same business or the same trade in a single city. So it's kind of like an early labor union in a way, but it's also it doesn't advocate in the same way that traditional labor unions do, say, in the early 20th century. But for example, all the merchants in a single town would be part of the Merchants Guild. All of the weavers would be part of the Weavers Guild. All of the sculptors or artists might be part of the Artists Guild. All of the blacksmiths would be part of the Blacksmiths Guild. And guilds gave workers financial security. They also provided training for new members of the guild who wanted to develop that trade, specifically if it was a skill-based trade like being an artist or a craftsman or a blacksmith. And guilds could have a lot of economic and even political power in medieval cities. They often protected markets within their cities by setting prices for goods and ensuring certain standards. They also regulated the apprenticeships, so the training for new guild members, providing materials and guidance, and people would often spend many, many years of their life as a guild member. So guilds, again, were sort of an organization for people in the same business or trade grouped together in a single city, and guilds could have a lot of political and economic influence and power in a medieval city. Here you can see an example of some of the trade routes that are developing in the High Middle Ages. Again, one of the characteristics of the High Middle Ages is this economic activity, specifically the return of long-distance trade. So you can see that a lot of trade is coming in from the Eastern Mediterranean, from the area that is sort of modern-day Israel, Palestine, also from the Black Sea through Constantinople, and most of that is going directly into Italy, specifically Venice and Genoa in northern Italy. But there's also some trading taking place overland, especially in Western Europe and even in Northern Europe. So a good example of the various trade routes that are starting to develop, which represent the revival of economic activity in the High Middle Ages. Our next topic is identity. And identity is a very interesting theme. It's very nuanced and not very obvious from the get-go. You kind of have to think about this theme. You have to make inferences about this theme because it can be very difficult to define. So we're looking at different concepts of identity, maybe more national or regional identity, or even a collective European identity. So in the Middle Ages, there was a dramatic variety in the notions of a medieval European identity. And really, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be European in the Middle Ages? Well, first of all, there's the legacy and the influence of a Roman past, of classical Rome, and I mentioned how many, political governments, empires, and ambitious political leaders are always going to try to be the next Rome or the next Julius Caesar, and we're going to see that all throughout history, well into the 20th century. However, after Rome fell, there's also considerable influence of Germanic tribes and their culture, and that influenced a lot of the developments of manorialism and feudalism. There's a very rigid social system that develops with the three estates. And of course, there's the dominance and the control of the Catholic Church, which introduces a strong religious identity to Europe. And finally, towards the high to late Middle Ages, we start to see the emergence of those feudal monarchies with the expansion of feudalism that will eventually expand into nation states. So the Middle Ages is really considered a formative period in the creation of European identity, because there's a little bit that comes in from the classical era. There's influence from the Christian church, and of course influence from some of those Germanic tribes. Now, another interesting issue with identity in Europe is this idea of regionalism versus nationalism. Nationalism refers more to sort of patriotic loyalty to a specific state. And in the modern era, we see the creation of these nation states. But Europe traditionally is very regionalized, meaning, let's say you live in Italy. You may not identify as Italian. You may instead identify with the region of Italy that you live in. So you may think of yourself as Sicilian or Neapolitan or Venetian or Florentine, right? As opposed to this concept of being a united city-state with an Italian identity, or an Italian united nation-state, excuse me. And part of the reason for this is because in the early Middle Ages, there really were no known states. Identity was very tribal. It was very localized because it was tied to your specific family, your specific location, your specific language, right? And then gradually, the rise of feudal monarchies in the High Middle Ages created a new sense of loyalty and potentially a new sense of identity. But that loyalty was often to a person rather than to a state or a concept of a political community, like a nation state. And again, those feudal monarchies were often much smaller and based in regions, and were not as big and expansive as the nation states we're used to seeing today. And the 100 Years' War and the monarchs of the later medieval period would start to encourage a sense of early nationalism. Like we said, with England and France, there starts to be more of a collective national identity. And we see nationalistic figures that help to define that identity emerge, like Joan of Arc or Henry V. However, regionalism is still a very, very strong presence. Regionalism and regional identity continues to dominate notions of European identity well into the modern period. And in some areas, it still does. Some of the current European nation states are seeing separatist movements from groups that who do not identify with the collective nation states. For example, in Spain, we have recently seen separatist movements from the region of Catalonia, which is where Barcelona is, or the Basque region in northern Spain. In Italy, there's a very different sense of identity if you are down in the island of Sicily, and there's even some groups that advocate for the succession of Sicily from the rest of Italy. But that's another story for another day. Moving on to our final theme and final slide of today's lecture, number 8, technological and scientific innovation. Now, in general, the Middle Ages is not the greatest area for technology and science when we look collectively at European history. We really do not see meaningful scientific development until the early modern era with the scientific revolution and developments in astrophysics. However, the Middle Ages do develop some important technology, which is useful in producing economic activity. It is useful for establishing future European endeavors like the Age of Exploration or the Renaissance. And a lot of this technology, this technological knowledge, came from European interactions with the Middle East, during and after the Crusades. So those interactions are often very important because not only do they produce trade, but with that trade also comes knowledge and technology that allows for civilizations to advance and develop. So let's look at a few examples of this new technology that develops in the European Middle Ages. In regards to agriculture, there were developments with plows, with horse collars, also the developments of horseshoes. There was also developments in the sort of management of agriculture, going from a 2-field system, for example, to a 3-field system, which would increase the efficiency and yields of the crops for farmers. In regards to architecture, some of the notable inventions of the Middle Ages included chimneys, also wheelbarrows, cranes, and by cranes I think of construction cranes used to build big buildings. By the time we get to the High Middle Ages, there are new engineering techniques used for buildings that utilize those cranes. And think about some of that Gothic architecture like Notre Dame and what was required to build that building. And this was, of course, centuries before they have any type of real machines or electricity or industry that we use for buildings today. And also another interesting development of the Middle Ages are mechanical clocks, specifically clock towers that emerged in major cities across Europe. Another important development was the watermill. You can see an example of a watermill here on the left side of the page. Watermills produced a early type of mechanical energy, right? Very slow, still ultimately human or animal powered, or in this case powered by water. But this produced enough energy that The Europeans could manufacture and grind things like grain. They could grind grain from wheat, or they could manufacture certain types of paper or metal. But this water was used to generate some energy long before we have proper mechanization in the 18th and 19th century. Important navigational technology was also gained through trade and interactions with the Middle East, specifically the compass, which was gained through trade with the Middle East, and that actually had come all the way from China. And also shipbuilding improvements, better sails, better rudders on ships. And these navigational technology is really important for setting Europe up for future exploration in the early modern era. Another interesting piece of sort of not really technology, but just piece of intelligence and information is the development of Arabic numerals. And Arabic numerals, which are the numbers we use today, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., began to replace the Latin numerals. Latin numerals were what was used by ancient Rome. This came in, of course, from the Middle East, from interactions with Arab groups, and it began to become more popular in the 13th century. And of course, there is military technology. We mentioned some of this when we learned about the 100 Years' War. Various types of armor were invented. Again, think of the knight in shining armor. Also, the idea of chainmail, which was sort of like a cloth made of metal bits. Also, stirrups and better saddles for cavalry who rode horses. The invention of cannons. The longbow, both of those were used in the 100 Years' War. And then the Byzantine Empire also used a really cool type of chemical warfare known as Greek fire, where they could really just launch fireballs at ships that might be attacking their city. And it was sort of like an early form of artillery and explosives that could have devastating effects. But overall, like I said earlier, the Middle Ages is known for its lack of innovation. The technological growth and achievements of Europe were very slow compared to other contemporary regions at the time, places like the Middle East and China, and also when compared to other time periods in European history, such as the Classical era or the Modern era. And developments of new technology often came from knowledge that was gained through trade. These new ideas and these new technological developments were not necessarily generated within Europe and were not generated by Europeans. Again, they were diffused from other cultures and came to Europe through those interactions. All right, that is the end of our last slideshow and lecture for Unit 0. Don't forget to do your write-up. Thank you for listening and have a great rest of the day.